Theresa Caputo, who stars in Long Island Medium, just got a new husband who was recently let go from the U.S. Navy. He is said to have defied his orders and married Theresa while he was on leave. According to U.S. Navy rules, active duty members must get permission from their superiors before getting married. He was discharged from the Navy as a punishment for not following that rule. He broke the regulations and married Theresa after a long love affair, which ruined his military career. For years, Theresa Caputo was in the news as the Long Island Medium, the woman with the huge hair, even greater personality, and a heart that could connect the living with the dead. But her most recent chapter wasn't about her readings. It was about love, a love that was both dangerous and undeniable. Daniel Harris was a decorated petty officer in the U.S. Navy. Daniel was the kind of man who could take charge of a room without saying a word. He was tall, disciplined, and had sharp eyes. They had met years before, long before they could be together. At first, it was just casual chats backstage at a charity event where Theresa was reading for veterans and Daniel was part of the honor guard. But those talks developed into phone calls, then late-night video conferences, and finally, the calm realization that they were falling in love. There was only one problem. Daniel was still on duty. In the Navy, there are rules that must be followed. Regulations said that any active duty service member who wished to get married had to fill out paperwork and get approval from their commanding authorities. It wasn't about love. It was about keeping everything in order, safe, and following the rules. Daniel didn't think you should have to ask permission to love someone, though. He always carried a little picture of Theresa in his breast pocket when he went to war. He would rush to visit her every time he came home on leave, counting down the hours until he had to go again. And with each farewell, the desire got stronger. Daniel knew exactly what he wanted to do when his next leave came up. Marry Theresa. No more waiting, no more paperwork and delays that never end. He had approached his boss for permission months before, but the procedure had stopped. They told him, "You'll just have to wait until we can look at your case." Daniel, on the other hand, thought life was too short to wait. Theresa was also unsure. She realized that marrying Daniel without the Navy's permission may be the end of his career. "Are you sure about this, Danny?" she asked him more than once. "Don't give up everything for me." But Daniel always said the same thing. "You're not everything, Theresa. You're more than everything. My job is with the Navy, but you are my life." So, on a clear fall afternoon with a sky full of gold and red, they drove out to a small chapel on the border of Long Island. There were no cameras or large production. Just Theresa's closest family, Daniel's best friend from the service, and the priest. Daniel gazed at Theresa like she was the only person in the world when they said their vows. At that moment, she knew he had chosen her over all else. His leaders got the news swiftly. When Daniel got back from vacation, he was called into the office. They didn't scream. They didn't fight. They just gave him the paperwork for an honorable but forced discharge. The official explanation was that they didn't follow the right steps for getting married while on active duty. The Navy thought that rules had been broken. Daniel's uniform felt heavier than it ever had when he walked out of that office. But when he got home and found Theresa waiting for him on the porch with her arms outstretched and tears in her eyes, he felt lighter than he ever had before. That night, they were alone in the kitchen with no cameras or audience. Daniel took a sip of his coffee and stated with a smile, "I guess I'm a civilian now." Theresa laughed even though she was crying. "Well, lucky for you. Regular people don't need permission to love me." Daniel got used to life outside of the military in the months that followed. He missed the structure, the friends, and the sense of goal, but he found a new purpose with Theresa. He even started working with her on charity events for veterans, using his passion to aid people who had served in the past. Their marriage became the talk of the Navy and the tabloids. It was a love that broke the rules but was worth the risk. Theresa would sometimes jest during her readings. "The dead tell you to follow the rules sometimes, but the living tell you to do what you want." Daniel would grip her hand under the table every time she uttered it, a silent reminder that some rules should be ignored when love is at stake. But it was a clear fall afternoon in Long Island, the type where the sunlight softly shines through the amber leaves, making everything it touches look golden. The well-known Long Island medium Theresa Caputo was getting ready for a private reading in her house. She could feel the heaviness in the air, which informed her that a mourning person was about to come through her door. That day, her client was Margaret Hayes, a middle-aged woman who was quiet and had tired eyes and a heart burdened with loss. She held a small picture frame close to her chest, and her knuckles were white from gripping it too firmly. Daniel, Margaret's only son, died in an automobile accident that happened very quickly 8 months ago. He was just 23 years old. Margaret had been lost since that day. Her days were quiet, and her evenings were full of restless thoughts. She went to Theresa with a desperate hope, to hear from Daniel, to know he was safe, and to find the fortitude to live again. Theresa's mood changed as soon as Margaret sat down. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the energy fill the space. "I have a young man coming forward," Theresa said. "He died in a tragic and unexpected way, and he's making me feel like he didn't get to say goodbye." As she nodded, Margaret's hands shook and tears began to form in her eyes. "That's my Danny," Theresa went on. "He showed me a car and told me that he wanted you to know that it wasn't your fault. He said that you always blamed yourself for not stopping him from going out that night." Margaret started to cry. "I told him to drive carefully, but I should have told him to stay home." Theresa leaned in and spoke in a loving but forceful voice. "He says, 'Mom, please stop. You didn't do this. I'm fine. I'm at peace.' He also shows me a blue baseball cap. Do you get that?" Margaret laughed through her tears, but it was unsteady. "He wore that cap every day since he was a teenager. He wouldn't leave the house without it." Theresa smiled softly. "He says he still wears it, and he's with you every morning when you make coffee. He shows me that you talk to his picture, and he hears everything you say." Margaret nodded and put her hand over her lips in disbelief. No one knew that every morning she would talk to Daniel's framed picture on the kitchen counter. Then Theresa's face got even softer. "He's telling you to start living again. He's not gone. He's just in a different place. He wants you to laugh, go to the park, paint, and do all the things you stopped doing. That's how you honor him." Margaret's face had transformed by the end of the reading. The deep sadness was still there, yet it seemed lighter, like a small window had been opened in a dark chamber. That day, when Margaret left Theresa's house, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. She couldn't bring Daniel back, but she could keep his love alive. And for the first time since he died, she thought she could go on living without feeling like she was leaving him behind. Theresa's heart was full as she watched her leave. She knew that Margaret's mending had only begun, but sometimes all it takes is one message from the other side to start putting things back together. But the sun shone through the windows of Theresa Caputo's pleasant reading room in the afternoon. There was a subtle fragrance of burning sage in the air, and calm instrumental music played in the background. Emily, a girl no older than 14, sat across from Theresa. She had long chestnut hair and eyes that looked anxious. Emily held a little locket in her fingers so firmly that her knuckles turned white. Her dad sat next to her with his hand on her shoulder, looking like he wasn't sure if it was a good idea to bring her here. Since her mother died 2 years ago, Emily hadn't talked much. She had stopped talking to her friends, stayed to herself, and locked away her feelings as if she was scared they would betray her. Theresa leaned in and said softly, "Emily, honey, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to." "Okay, I'm just going to start by telling you how I feel." Emily nodded without saying anything. Theresa closed her eyes and carefully moved her hands through the air, as if she could sense an invisible current. "There's a woman coming up to me. She's young, pretty, and she says she's your mom." Tears entered Emily's eyes right away. She bit her lip but didn't say anything. Theresa smiled gently. "She has her hands out to you and says, 'Tell my baby girl that I never really left. I've been right here the whole time.'" Emily's hold on the locket got stronger. Theresa turned her head to the side and listened to something she couldn't see. "She's saying that you've been putting up walls around your heart. You don't want to let people get too close because you're terrified of losing them and feeling that anguish again." Emily's lips shook. Theresa's voice was soft as she said, "She says she understands." But she told me to tell you this. It's okay to let people in. Emily blinked, and her tears fell easily. She really said that? Her voice broke for the first time. Yes, dear. She remarked that life will bring you new people to love, not to take her place, but to add to the love you already have. She says you don't have to keep your heart locked up. Theresa stopped for a moment, and then smiled. Oh, she's showing me something. She says you draw a lot? She shows me photographs and sketchbooks. She says that drawings are your safe haven, but she wants you to share them with other people. Emily laughed a little, through her tears. I draw all the time, but I never show anyone. Your mom says you'll be surprised when you do. She adds that your art is a part of your heart, and that when you show it to others, they can see the true you. Emily remained quiet for a time, then she murmured, I'm scared. Theresa nodded. Yes, I know, dear. But your mom claims you are stronger than you realize. She says to tell you, don't let fear lock your heart. Let love be the key. Beside Emily, her father discreetly wiped his eyes. Theresa leaned back a little and spoke softly. Your mom is showing me one last thing. She is behind you with her hands on your shoulders. Whenever you feel alone, just touch that locket you're holding, she says. I'll be right there. Emily cautiously opened the locket to show a small photo of her mother smiling. She put it to her chest, closed her eyes, and took a deep, trembling breath. Theresa grinned like she knew something. Now she's smiling. She adds, that's my girl. And then she steps back, yet her love is still there. Emily wiped her eyes and smiled, even though it was little. For the first time in 2 years, she felt a warmth that wasn't only from the sun in the room. It was the love her mother had left behind, still alive and still guiding her. Emily turned to Theresa as they were about to leave. Thanks, I think I'm ready to give it a shot. Theresa's eyes become softer. That's all your mom wanted, dear. Just to see you open your heart again. Emily recognized something her mother had been trying to teach her all along as she walked out of the room with the locket in her hand. Love doesn't go away when someone dies. It stays, gets bigger, and waits for you to be ready to let it back in. But the big windows of the Long Island Community Center let in the warm golden rays of the late afternoon sun. Theresa Caputo sat at a little round table with a large cup of iced coffee next to her. Her blonde hair was well-styled, and her nails were flawlessly manicured. She was there for a private reading, but this one was a little different. Her secretary had been telling her about a woman named Janine for weeks. Janine was a passionate superfan who had been following Theresa's career for almost 10 years. Janine had all of Theresa's books, went to every live event she could drive to, and even got a small feather tattooed on her wrist as a memento of her belief in the hereafter. But this was more than just meeting her idol. Janine had a very sad motive for requesting a reading. Theresa saw right away that Janine was holding a folded piece of paper in her palm like it was a lifeline when she walked into the room. She looked like she had been crying for days since her eyes were red around the edges. Theresa smiled and told her to sit down. Theresa said, "Hi, sweetheart," in a soft but steady voice. "I want you to know that I don't control who comes through before we even start. Spirit has already made me feel like there's a young female energy here. Do you get what I mean?" Janine's voice shook. "Yes, it would be my daughter Mia. She died 2 years ago." Her hands shook as she opened the paper and set it down on the table. This is the final note she sent me. Every night I read it." Theresa took a big breath, and in that moment, her heart hurt. Theresa had met many of sad parents before, but there was something in Janine's eyes, something so raw and desperate, that made Theresa feel Janine's pain immediately away. She closed her eyes and listened not just with her ears, but with the part of her that had always been able to connect with the other side. "She told me," Theresa said softly, "that she died very suddenly. You didn't see this coming. She also makes me feel really bad about myself. She doesn't regret where she is, but she does regret not being able to say goodbye properly." Janine cried out in pain. "It was an accident with a car. She was just 17. I never got to say, 'I love you' again." Theresa leaned in, and her eyes shone. "She says you said it more times than she can count." And every time you say her name softly at night, she hears it. She is also showing me a yellow sweater. Does that signify anything? Janine was shocked. Yes, that was her favorite. She wore it the night before she left. Theresa smiled faintly. She says she still wears it in spirit because it makes her feel close to you. And she has a feather in her hand. That's your sign, right? Janine raised her wrist to show off the tiny feather tattoo. Yes, I got this after she died. She says, Mom, I know you got that for me. She wants you to know she was there when you did it. She also talks about a tune that you used to sing together in the car. It was slow. Janine's tears streamed freely now. Yes, that was our song. I still play it when I'm by myself in the car. Theresa could feel the weight of her own feelings on her chest. She stretched across the table and grabbed Janine's hand. She says that every time you play it, she's in the passenger seat with you. You aren't driving by yourself, honey. She's right there. The room felt warm and full of love at that moment, as if they were both being hugged by an invisible force. Theresa's eyes filled with tears. This wasn't something she did often during sessions, but this one impacted her harder than others. Theresa continued, her voice shaking a little. You know, I've been doing this work for a long time. But there are moments when Spirit sends me a message that is so pure and full of love that it reminds me why I do this. Your daughter wants me to tell you one more thing. She doesn't want you to merely get by. She wants you to live. She says you've been holding back and keeping people away. But she says it's alright to let happiness back in. Let people in, she said. Janine closed her eyes and took a big breath, as if those words had suddenly taken a heavy weight off her chest. I needed to hear that more than anything. Theresa wiped a tear from her face. She needed you to hear it. And now that she has spoken it, she is at ease. You gave her a great life, and now she wants you to have one too. Janine jumped up and held Theresa passionately once the reading was over. She whispered, Thank you for giving me my daughter back for a little while. Theresa stayed in her seat and stared at her iced coffee, which had long since melted, while Janine left the room. Her hands were still shaking, but not because she was connected to Spirit. It was because she was so emotional. She knew she would always remember this reading. And deep inside, she prayed Janine would never forget it either. Theresa wrote in her journal that night, Sometimes Spirit heals them. Spirit heals me too sometimes. But the sun was just coming up over Long Island, and it shed a golden light over the Caputo family's house. Theresa Caputo was in the kitchen drinking her morning coffee. Her distinctive big blonde hair was already neatly styled. It was the day before Angela's wedding, and she had to do last-minute fittings, decorations, and rehearsals all day. Everyone was excited, but Theresa had been discreetly making other plans. Something her family didn't know about. Theresa thought of Angela as her daughter. Angela had gone to see her Aunt Theresa practically every weekend when she was a child. Theresa had been there for Angela when she lost her father, Theresa's brother-in-law, 5 years ago. Angela talked a lot about how she wanted her dad could be there to accompany her down the aisle. Theresa couldn't bring him back in person, but she had a feeling he was already plotting to show up in a different way. That morning, Theresa texted her sister and said, I need everyone to come over before the rehearsal dinner tonight. No excuses. Trust me. The message was hard to understand, but Theresa was known for her surprises, so no one questioned it. The Caputo living room was full by 5 p.m. Angela was in her pants and a sweater, her mother was in a navy dress, her relatives were all over the couch, and even the groom, Daniel, looked a little apprehensive. Theresa stood in front of them with her hands clasped and a smile on her face. Okay, she said, her Long Island accent as warm as ever. I realize tomorrow is a huge day, but I thought we'd have a different kind of rehearsal before you say I do. One that includes the other side. Angela's eyebrows went up. Are you reading? Now? Theresa smiled. Surprise. Everyone was laughing in the room, but when Theresa closed her eyes and took a breath, the mood changed. She started to talk about the first spirit that was coming forward. It was a man with dark hair, a big smile, and the smell of motor oil and cologne. Angela's eyes filled with tears right away. That's my dad, she said in a low voice. Theresa nodded. He says he's been trying to get your attention through the radio in your car. Does the music shift to his old favorite tunes at random times? Angela put her hand over her lips and gasped. Yes. Last week, out of the blue, it switched to Billy Joel. She murmured softly, "That's him. And tomorrow, when you walk down the aisle, he'll be right there. He can feel like a pleasant wind or a little touch on your shoulder. That's him keeping you steady." Angela's mother started to cry and held her daughter's hand. But the messages kept coming. Theresa looked at Daniel. "You have a grandfather in spirit. He is thanking you for wearing his cufflinks tomorrow." Daniel blinked in shock. How did you? My mom gave them to me this morning." Theresa grinned as if she knew what was going on. "He says you're going to be a great husband, but you have to let Angela win some of the arguments." Everyone chuckled, which made the mood in the room better. More and more family members got messages one by one. Theresa's cousin found out that her grandma had seen the outfit she chose for the wedding and liked it. A young nephew learned that his dead dog, Max, will be hanging out by the dessert table tomorrow, hunting for cake crumbs. The mood in the room had changed by the time the reading was over. There was no longer just enthusiasm for the wedding. There was a deep, serene peace. Everyone felt linked, not just to each other, but also to the loved ones who couldn't be there in person yet somehow still were. Angela stood up and gave Theresa a big hug. "Aunt Theresa, you don't know how much this means to me. Now tomorrow is going to be fantastic." Theresa stepped back and smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "Sweetheart, your dad wouldn't miss it for anything." The family felt better when they departed that night and were ready for the big day. And when Angela walked down the aisle the next day, a soft breeze lifted her veil just enough for her to know her father was honoring his word. But it was a nice fall day in Long Island, and Theresa Caputo had just ended a long day of private readings when her assistant texted her, "Theresa, there's a woman named Jamie who has been waiting months to meet you. She claims this has to do with her father and her own identity." A few days later, Jamie came to Theresa's reading room. She sat down and fidgeted with her hands. She was a tall, graceful woman in her early 30s with long auburn hair and eyes that showed both optimism and anxiety. Theresa smiled warmly because she could tell Jamie was nervous. "Sweetheart, take a breath. You're secure here. I'm going to go straight to it now because Spirit is already moving forward." Theresa's attitude altered almost right away. She put her hand on her heart and glanced at a blank space in the room. "I have a man coming through. He is showing me that he died a few years ago. He had big hands and a deep voice, and he was the kind of guy who worked with tools or in a shop. Does that ring a bell?" Jamie started to cry. "That's my dad. He passed away in 2018. Theresa nodded, and her voice got softer. "He is showing me that you two didn't understand each other. He makes me think that there were things he didn't get about you when he was alive." Jamie gulped down hard. "Yes, I came out as transgender after he died. He never knew me as who I am. And I've been afraid that if he were still alive, he wouldn't have liked me." Theresa closed her eyes and listened closely. "Jamie, your dad is saying, I get it now. He makes me feel like he's been looking over your path from the other side. He is smiling and shows me a picture of you as a child trying on clothes that made you happy. He says, I wish I could have told you that I loved you just the way you are." Jamie cried a lot. "Are you sure?" Because he was old-fashioned. He was tough. Theresa leaned in, and her Long Island accent was solid but soft. "Sweetheart, in heaven, there is no ego and no judgment. He says he's sorry for every time you didn't believe him when he said he loved you. He's proud of you for being brave enough to be yourself. He's urging me to say this word for word. I might not have understood in life, but I understand everything now that I'm dead. You are my daughter, and you always will be." Jamie laughed shakily through her tears. "That's all I ever wanted to hear." Theresa smiled, and her eyes shone. "That's why he came today. So you could finally have that peace." She stopped and looked at Jamie's hands. "Oh, and he's showing me a charm bracelet with a small wrench charm on it. Does that imply anything?" Jamie gasped. "Yes. Every day I wear it. It came from his old toolbox. That's how he says he's with you every step of the way, Theresa remarked. He's right there, holding your hand, even when you don't believe in yourself. At the end of the reading, Jamie's shoulders looked lighter. She held Theresa close and said, "Thank you for bringing my dad back to me, even if only for a moment." Jamie stepped outside into the crisp fall air and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Total acceptance. She realized that her father's ghost had just engulfed her in the sweetest hug she had ever felt. Hello, beautiful viewers. Welcome to my channel. My name is Mina, and I hope your day is going well. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you appreciate the video.